This is Tehran, penetrating an airspace once praised as the steel shield of the Islamic Republic, the very area that Iran itself declared would determine who controls the Middle East in the 21st century. Surveillance screens display unusual dark patches. Those dark patches are not technical glitches. They are not jamming signals or routine maintenance. They are links in the early warning system that have been neutralized, after years of proclaiming readiness to wipe Israel off the map and defeat any adversary daring to enter its airspace. The Iranian Air Force, IRIAF, was barely able to get a single squadron airborne in the opening days of the campaign. More than 1,000 military targets were struck, as confirmed by US Central Command. Air defense radars around Tehran, Tabriz, and Bushehr simultaneously vanished from the surveillance network. Even the IRGCAF, the force tasked with guarding the skies using S-300 PMU-2 systems and domestic missile complexes, could not stop the initial wave of preemptive strikes. Yet what we are witnessing now is not a balanced confrontation, much less the fiery counterattack Tehran once promised the world. This is the astonishingly rapid collapse of an air defense architecture built over decades. A force possessing F-14s, MiG-29s, Su-24s, a force that always described itself as the backbone of national deterrence, is being stripped of control over its own skies in just a few days. But that is not even the most striking part. The real question is, why was the entire structure neutralized so easily? Why did equipment once hailed as impenetrable go silent after the very first salvo? To grasp the scale and speed of this campaign, we must look at the latest data from CENTCOM and independent analyses of the extent to which Iran's Air Force infrastructure has been disabled. Those numbers are not rumors, and they may become one of the most notable statistics of 21st century air warfare. In the early hours of February 28, 2026, a chain of events unfolded so rapidly that even the on-duty officers in Tehran could not comprehend what was happening. Primary radar stations began losing signal, cluster by cluster, from Tabriz to Bushehr. That was the first sign of a campaign long in preparation. Then came a flood of reports to Iranian command. Tabriz airbase hit. Konarak's aircraft bunkers destroyed. Zahedan radar station knocked out. What occurred in those first few hours showed Iran was completely reactive. As Afterburner assessed, they have completely destroyed the Iranian Air Force. There is really nothing left that can get airborne at this point. Those words are not exaggeration. Evidence appeared quickly. Bases like Tabriz were struck before any F-4 Phantom, F-5 Tiger, or Su-22 could leave the runway. Aerotime even confirmed that Israel shot down one F-4 and one F-5 while they were preparing for takeoff, rendering every desperate effort by Iranian pilots meaningless. It was not just aircraft. Everything that allowed aircraft to exist was targeted. Satellite imagery shows the aircraft bunkers at Konarak completely destroyed and the radar at Zahedan severely damaged. Every target was selected with precision. No strike was random. This was coordination between the United States and Israel with one objective: eliminate Iran's air combat capability before it could even begin. To understand why, you must examine what happened in the first 100 hours, the period when the United States deployed an almost perfect combination of technology, tactics, and air superiority. The US Air Force brought its best to the battlefield. B-2 Spirits from Whiteman AFB, F-22 Raptors, F-35As, along with F-8-18ES squadrons from the US Navy 5th Fleet in the Persian Gulf. Overhead, E-3 Sentry AWACS covered every movement, while KC-15s and KC-46s ensured the campaign never paused. But what Iran never anticipated was that the campaign did not begin with bombs. According to Business Insider, the US and Israel opened with multiple non-kinetic measures, including cyber attacks, communication suppression, and even blinding certain Iranian tactical satellites. Hours before the first American fighter turned toward Tehran, General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, acknowledged, "We stunned and disoriented them, and air superiority was established immediately afterward." He added, "This air superiority not only protects our forces but also allows them to operate freely in Iranian airspace." Those were not political statements. They reflected the reality that Iran conducted no manned airstrikes in the first 4 days of the war. And the reason is obvious. Every Iranian pilot at that moment understood that taking off meant suicide. Afterburner also affirmed, engaging F-15s, F-16s, F-18s, or F-35s at this point is suicide. Within the first 24 hours, the number of Iranian aircraft was reduced from roughly 350 to 200. A staggering figure even for experts familiar with the scale of damage in modern warfare. And what is more terrifying, those 200 were the only ones still airworthy. The rest were a collection of rusty airframes from the 1970s, 1980s. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio called the initial wave of strikes proactive defense, while warning Tehran that the hardest blows are yet to come. For an air force that lost half its aircraft in just 24 hours, those words were more frightening than anything else. On paper, the Iranian Air Force, IRIAF, possesses a relatively large force of approximately 300 to 350 aircraft according to international research institutes, including names once considered elite in air combat such as the F-14A Tomcat from the 1970s, MiG-29A, Su-24 Mach, and F-4 Phantom II, but that is only a nominal picture. The reality of 2026 is that the vast majority of those aircraft could not maintain combat readiness. Decades of sanctions left Iran almost unable to obtain genuine spare parts for F-14s or Phantom IIs, forcing reliance on self-recovery solutions, cannibalizing parts from abandoned airframes, or manufacturing substitutes under constrained conditions. Domestic upgrades, though heavily promoted, were insufficient to bring old-generation aircraft into a modern combat environment. Iran also lacks a tactical data link system comparable to Link 16, meaning squadrons cannot share information in real time and must rely on 1980s-era voice radio communications, easily jammed and intercepted. The problem is not limited to outdated aircraft. Even Iran's proudest air defense systems could not compensate for structural weaknesses. They possess Russian-supplied S-300 PMU-2s. The domestic Bushehr 373 system claimed to rival the S-400 and numerous Tor M1 complexes. However, these systems do not operate as a unified network. They are fragmented, lack coordination, and lack a common data loop. When jammed or cyber-attacked, actions the US and Israel carried out right before the airstrikes began, each system becomes an isolated unit unable to support the others. Iran's greatest weakness is not in missiles or hardware, but in its operating mechanism. The IRIAF and the IRGC Aerospace Force operate separately, each with its own command chain, communications network, and tactical objectives. In peacetime, this seems harmless. But in modern warfare, where air superiority depends on the speed of data exchange and unity of command, it is disastrous. When the first US and Israeli strikes hit C4ISR centers, both forces lost the ability to coordinate, turning each air defense unit into an isolated island. This is the biggest reason Iran could not mount an organized response in the first 100 hours. Above all, Iran chose the wrong priorities. For more than a decade, Tehran poured resources into medium-range ballistic missiles, Shahed UAVs, and asymmetric attack strategies. They bet that cheap, mass-produced weapons would create an effective deterrent shield. But modern warfare does not begin with missiles or UAVs. It begins with who controls the skies. When radars are suppressed, runways are cratered, communications are jammed, and squadrons cannot take off. Every other military doctrine becomes meaningless. That is why Iran's system collapsed so quickly. Not because they lacked equipment, but because they built an air force structure incompatible with 21st century warfare realities. The rapid collapse of the Iranian Air Force in the opening hours of the conflict is not surprising when compared to the overwhelming US capability in air operations. The US Air Force not only possesses the world's most advanced hardware, but operates it within a networked warfare ecosystem that Iran has no means to counter. At the heart of this superiority is the F-22 Raptor, the absolute air dominance fighter with speeds exceeding Mach 2+, supercruise capability allowing sustained supersonic flight without afterburners, and the ANA APG-77 radar that can detect, track, and lock targets at distances Iranian air defenses cannot fathom. The F-22 is not just a fighter. It is an invisible platform that always sees the enemy first. Operating alongside the F-22 is the F-35A, the cornerstone of fifth-generation warfare. Its fused sensor suite and AN APG-81A ESA radar allow the F-35 to collect, synthesize, analyze, and share data in real time with all other forces. Thanks to data fusion, a single F-35 can provide the entire formation with a three-dimensional battlespace picture, from Iranian radar locations and UAV flight paths to the operational status of S-300 PMU-2 systems. Iran may have Russian-supplied air defense systems, but they have no way to counter a fighter whose radar signature is nearly impossible to lock and whose signals are so dispersed that observers call it a ghost in the sky. Yet the most pivotal platform in the opening strikes against Iran must be reserved for the B-2 Spirit, the strategic stealth bomber with a range exceeding 11,000 kilometers, capable of departing from the United States, reaching Iran, completing its mission, and returning home. More importantly, the B-2 can carry the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, the largest penetrating bomb ever used in combat. powerful enough to punch through reinforced concrete bunkers where Iran houses command centers and strategic weapon stockpiles. The strikes on Iran's C4ISR centers were no miracle. They were the direct result of B-2 operations that virtually no Iranian air defense system could detect. But American power lies not only in individual platforms but in total force coordination. Overhead, E-3 Sentry AWACS provides a comprehensive battlefield view and orchestrates the entire fleet's operations. From orbit, ISR satellite systems monitor the smallest changes in Iranian radar deployments. Parallel to that are cyber and electronic warfare operations that disrupt communications, jam critical frequency bands, and leave every Iranian air defense unit operating in isolation. These elements combine to form what the military calls the kill chain. Find, track, engage, number ses. In practice, this means the US can detect an Iranian target hundreds of kilometers deep, establish coordinates, track its movement, pass data to F-22s, F-35s, or B-2s, destroy the target, and assess the outcome almost instantly. Every link in the kill chain is supported by a network of sensors, satellites, early warning aircraft, and precision weapons. Iran is different. They operate on a traditional layered air defense model where each radar unit, each missile launcher, each aircraft squadron functions independently under centralized orders, unable to share data as quickly or broadly as the US. When the center is struck, the entire structure is severed. When radars are blinded, air defense units lose coordination. When runways are neutralized, aircraft become immobile metal hulks. In the environment of modern warfare, the difference between the two doctrines becomes stark. The US fights in a real-time networked grid where information is the most powerful weapon. Iran fights with a platform-centric model lacking integration, speed, and precision. When these two systems meet on the same battlefield, the outcome is predetermined. The US Air Force is not merely superior in equipment. It is superior in how it wages war, and that is why, in just a few hours, Iran lost its skies. In just 100 hours, it lost the ability to recover, and for the remainder of the campaign it could not reclaim anything it had lost. While Iran still believed it could rally forces for a counterattack, its key air bases were sequentially neutralized in such a precise order that no tactical adjustment was possible. Mehrabad, the heart of Tehran's military air traffic control network, was the first to be struck. The runways that once hosted entire squadrons of F-14s and MiG-29s were now pockmarked with deep bomb craters, making any approach or takeoff impossible. The command and control system there was disabled when transmitting stations, signal lines, and the military control tower were knocked out almost simultaneously. Iranian officers lost the ability to send orders or coordinate with other units, turning Mehrabad from a bustling operations hub into a meaningless radio blackout zone. At Isfahan Air Base, regarded as the last refuge for the remaining operational F-14As, the damage was no less severe. A massive explosion at the fuel depot left the entire base engulfed in flames for hours. For an air force already short on spare parts and engines, losing fuel meant losing all sortie capability. In modern warfare, sometimes you do not need to destroy the aircraft, you just need to make it unable to fly. And that is exactly what the campaign achieved. Iran's attempts to salvage what remained only highlighted their desperation. The aircraft was still there. The pilots were still there. The squadrons existed in name, but every element that allowed them to function had been eliminated. Tabriz Tactical Airbase, which had already been spotlighted when Israel claimed to have shot down an F-4 and an F-5 just as they were preparing for takeoff, became the clearest proof of Iran's helplessness. Aircraft bunkers were breached, domes collapsed, and most planes lay buried under concrete and earth. They were not completely destroyed, but neutralized to the point of being unusable in the short term. The Iranian Air Force, which relied heavily on repair and maintenance facilities here, now had to accept that it would not be able to return these airframes to the battlefield at the most critical moment. In the south, Bushehr faced a similar fate. Its main runways were hit repeatedly, so any repair effort lasted only minutes before being destroyed again. The base's military communication system was disabled after a series of combined electronic and kinetic strikes, completely severing contact with other units. Iran no longer had the ability to coordinate regional defense. Each base became a disconnected point, isolated and left to fend for itself in the dark. One by one, the elements that make up an active Air Force runways, fuel, command, maintenance, were stripped away. And what Iran realized then, perhaps too late, was that to wipe out a nation's air power, you do not necessarily have to destroy every single aircraft. You just need to make them unable to take off. That is why the term wiped out in modern warfare does not always refer to the number of aircraft destroyed, but to the loss of the ability to conduct organized operations. When bases are neutralized, when runways become cratered strips of churned earth, when fuel depots are incinerated, when air traffic control systems are severed, and when command chains cannot issue orders, then an air force, no matter how many planes remain, exists only on paper. At that point, Tehran understood an undeniable truth. They had not just lost their bases, they had lost their skies. The rapid collapse of the Iranian Air Force was not just an air victory. It produced far-reaching geopolitical consequences across the Middle East and beyond Iran's borders. First, it sent a clear message to the proxy forces backed by Tehran Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, an armed group stretching from Iraq to Syria. They had counted on Iran to demonstrate strategic deterrence to bolster their regional standing. But what unfolded in the first 100 hours of the war showed the opposite. Iran could not even defend itself against a focused campaign, so how could it protect its proxies when the situation worsened? The psychological front therefore suffered a serious blow. When bases like Mehrabad, Isfahan or Tabriz were neutralized in mere hours, the armed groups that had relied on Iran's military prestige were forced to reassess Tehran's ability to support them under pressure from the US or Israel. This shift could trigger larger upheavals in Syria, Iraq and Lebanon, where the balance of power was already fragile. It was not only the proxies. The world was also watching closely what happened at the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point through which about 20% of the world's crude oil passes. Iran had repeatedly threatened to close this maritime route in the event of military attack, but the swift collapse of its air defenses and air force made that threat unrealistic. When Iran no longer controlled the skies over its own territory, maintaining dominance in one of the world's most vital sea lanes became baseless. This immediately strengthened the role of the US Navy Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain, which has maintained a permanent presence in the Gulf to ensure maritime flow. The Fifth Fleet now not only monitored the security of shipping lanes, but held absolute initiative if Iran attempted any escalation at Hormuz. Alongside that, CENTCOM solidified its position as the command, with the fastest and most effective ability to deploy combined operations in the Middle East, backed by a network of bases, infrastructure, and forces ready to intervene by sea, air, and land. The strategic message Washington wanted to send to the region, and indeed to the entire world, was crystal clear. The United States retains the ability to achieve air superiority in any theater, at any time, even against an adversary possessing supposedly advanced air defense systems and a widely distributed base network like Iran. The campaign also reminded many who thought the concept outdated, the notion of air superiority. In a world awash with new technologies like suicide drones, ballistic missiles, and cyber warfare, some believed air superiority no longer played the decisive role it did during the Cold War. But events in Iran proved the opposite. When a nation loses its skies, it loses freedom of action. It loses the ability to deploy, supply, protect, and deter. For American audiences, the lesson from this campaign is straightforward. Air superiority is not a relic of the 20th century. It is the prerequisite for global deterrence in the 21st century. That is why the United States invests in programs like the F-35, B-21, and networked warfare systems, not to show off power, but to ensure that any crisis anywhere in the world can be shaped by whoever controls the skies. Looking back at the entire campaign, air forces are always the first line of defense for any modern nation, and when that line collapses, every other deterrent capability quickly loses meaning. A country can possess a large stockpile of ballistic missiles, produce thousands of UAVs, claim to own advanced air defense systems, but all of that exists only in theory if the skies are no longer under their control. Iran is the textbook example. When radars were neutralized, they lost their eyes. When runways were cratered, they lost their wings. When command centers were paralyzed, they lost the brain directing all military activity. And when all three elements vanished in just a few hours, Iran lost the most basic capability of any armed force, control of the battle space. True, Iran still had the IRGC's missile arsenal and could still operate Shahed UAVs, but those were unilateral capabilities, not tools of an active battlefield force. Missiles can only be launched. They cannot defend airspace. UAVs can only harass. They cannot replace fighter squadrons. A weak air force means every other military operation is confined to passive defense. In modern warfare, whoever controls the skies dictates the tempo, the space, and the nature of the conflict. And Iran lost that before it could even react. This war, whether it continues or has ended, has clearly demonstrated the difference between a force built on networked combat capability and one reliant on fragmented hardware incapable of operating in a high-speed combat environment. And that is also a reminder to every nation, not just Iran. In 21st century warfare, the country with the most declarations does not win. It is the country that seizes control of the skies first. If you found this analysis helpful, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next battlefield updates. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.